Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a minute since I've done a proper review on here, at least a week. But it's spooky season, it's finally come upon us, and I figured that I'd take it upon myself to review a horror classic, which I had not seen until a day or so ago. And I just really wanted to get on here and talk about that, and of course, that is Candyman from 1992, written and directed by Bernard Rose, starring Virginia Madsen, Tony Todd, Xander Berkeley, and Cassie Lemons. This film is one that I've heard about for quite some time now, and I actually did see the sequel, which is of the same name, from 2021, directed by Nia DaCosta. And I really liked that movie, especially the cultural angle that was put on it by DaCosta and Jordan Peele. So naturally, I was really excited to watch this one after all this time because I heard so many things about it. Tony Todd as the Candyman himself. So many things going into this movie because I think this is one of those films that the urban legend has kind of superseded the one in the actual movie as well, which is pretty hard to come by for a horror movie, right? But this is one that I think certainly deserves the praise in regards to how iconic it is, but also one that I feel like doesn't get enough. I think this is not only one of the best horror films from the 90s, but I think this is one of the best horror films of all time. Certainly in the slasher genre, you don't get much better than Candyman. And I think a big reason because of that is the writing in this film. The script is super tight for the most part. Obviously there's a few things here or there, but just the structure of it and really how this film takes its time to set you into the story. It kind of comes from an investigative journalism standpoint. And I really love that approach to the film because you get to learn the urban legend along with these characters. And they really take their time to develop the characters along the way. Which is why I think a film like this really works. Because it isn't until like the last half of the movie when shit starts to hit the fan, you could say. And look, I am going to give some spoilers here because, you know, it's over 30-year-old movie. But I feel like I can't properly talk about this classic horror film without diving a bit deeper into the story, which is really what impressed me the most. Following Helen, played by Virginia Madsen, who I just have to say is probably one of the best horror protagonists of all time. And I think Madsen's performance in here is just absolutely stellar. One of the best leads in any horror movie. And besides Madsen, of course, you have to talk about the ever so iconic Tony Todd as a Candyman. My goodness, his presence, his words when he comes on the screen, it is so powerful and so haunting. Just the stance that he has when he's standing on the screen for the first time, and they use him so sparingly but so effectively, and I think that's why Candyman is such a great villain, as for many other reasons which I will get into in a little bit. But I think the first thing about this movie that really struck me off the bat, besides the approach that they took to this, was the themes, because this really goes beyond just a generic slasher film. I would even throw Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween into that category, because let's be honest, they're not going much above the sum of their parts, and that's fine for what those movies are. But I like something with a bit more meat and potatoes, something to think about, you could say. And I think this film gives you that in spades, especially from the angle where they're essentially pointing out the fact how white people like to appropriate black stories and black trauma for their own benefit. Because the whole point of the story is Helen and her friend, they're trying to essentially write a graduate paper on urban legend. And essentially they're going into these very, impoverished, crime-ridden communities and trying to get whatever they can to build up the legend for their paper and the acumen of it. It really is something that I think is very ahead of its time in pointing out, even though this film is kind of a white savior movie itself in a lot of ways. But, I think the fact that this film is even talking about these issues, and it's very subtle. It's very subtle. And I think that's what I love about it, because, you really have to sit down and think about this film to really appreciate what it's trying to get at. And I absolutely love that they don't let Helen off the hook for this, no pun intended. They really put our lead through the ringer, and I absolutely love horror movies that do that. I think those are some of the most effective stories, just in general, I would even say, not just in horror, but in horror especially, because what she has to go through throughout this entire film is beyond heartbreaking. And even if you think she's being pretty terrible at the beginning of the movie, shamelessly taking these stories and using them for her benefit, the turns that her story takes really makes you feel so empathetic and heartbroken for her by the end of the story. Because as much as it is about this paper and urban legend and kind of the breakdown of urban legend, it's also about this woman's failing marriage. And I wish that it was a bit more prevalent in a few scenes. I think that's one of my few issues with the movie. But you really see her husband, played by Xander Berkeley. They hint a lot at the beginning of the movie, and it's told in a very subtle way. Yet again, it's subtlety that really makes this movie so prime. I really feel that way. And I absolutely love how they execute that whole arc and how that concludes upon itself. But just, again, like, the horror that is found in this film when it finally kicks in that last stretch of the movie is just so unnerving and incredible. Like I said, when Todd shows up the first time, because the great thing that's so great about Candyman, and why I've kind of almost forgiven this film for characters making stupid decisions, it's because the decisions they're making aren't really stupid, because why are they supposed to believe such a outlandish myth, right? And I love that, that you say his name in the mirror 5 times, which I will not do right now. I think that shows you how powerful this movie is. But I think the thing that's so great about it is he feeds off of that, belief. And if someone doesn't believe in him, that's when he strikes. He's almost like a really fucked up version of Santa Claus, or something like that. But I absolutely love, after Helen has that altercation in the bathroom between the gang members, and they're like, oh, that was the real Candyman, okay, whatever. That is when she finally doesn't buy into it. And then that is when Candyman appears at when you think you're the most invulnerable. Is in fact when you are the most vulnerable. And I love what they do to her. This is why Candyman is such a great villain, because essentially he gaslights this entire community into believing she's a murderer when she winds up on the floor in that woman's apartment with blood all over her and the dog's head cut off and the baby gone. It's just like, holy crap, man. It's so unbelievable seeing what this woman has to go through. And yeah, you might not agree with what she's doing, but she didn't deserve all of that. And I absolutely love how this is kind of like his, I want to say it is his revenge on her, doing this to this community, but also the mythology behind Candyman himself is very key to the relationship between him and Helen. And I love the lore in this movie as well, and what happened to Candyman, essentially falling in love with a former slave owner's daughter, and how he was eventually killed because of that, as you would expect. And I absolutely think the way that plays into this white savior narrative is really brilliant. And how, at a certain point, they even have her second guessing what has happened, because a lot of times Candyman just appears to her, and she starts second guessing whether this is all in her head or not. And obviously it isn't, especially in that scene where he kills the doctor, which is so brutal and so great. But I think, like all the best horror protagonists, it really is like that moment when she comes back to the apartment and she sees her husband with his student that we saw earlier in the movie, and she finally realizes, like, I have nothing left to lose. And the fact that the real monster was there the whole time is really kind of brilliant, I think, because he's such a despicable guy. And I think if that wasn't executed as well as it was, it still would be a great movie, but I think it really elevates it to the next level. And of course, I mean, there's so much to love, especially when she finally goes to Candyman and you get that amazing scene with the bees in Tony Todd's mouth. It's so unbelievable, which actually was real. I don't know if I could ever do anything like that, but I give props to Tony Todd. I hear he got like $1,000 every time he got stung. He put that in his contract, so good on you, man. It definitely serves for one of the most iconic horror sequences of all time, you could say. But just how I just love the way this movie wraps up, especially with the kid that took her to the bathroom earlier, where she was later assaulted. I absolutely love how that ties back around when she finds the baby Anthony in the fire and crawls out, and how the whole community sees the hook and goes and burns down the junk pile that she's in. And the reckoning of Candyman, but also her redemption arc in saving the child, and essentially at the cost of her own life, and how she essentially makes a new cult amongst herself, this community who absolutely reveres her after this moment in time. It's just so brilliantly executed. And then of course the funeral scene where they all come and pay tribute to her, I think is really, really powerful. A very, very powerful moment in this movie. And also the very end, which I didn't know how to feel about at first, but I think it works insanely well, especially when he says Helen in the mirror 5 times, and then she appears to him and kills her husband and gets that revenge. I mean, what a great way to essentially reinvent the urban legend in this story in a way that feels satisfying to our lead character and her predicament. It's writing like this that really, I think, makes Candyman one of the best horror films of all time. I'd probably put it in my top 20 horror movies. I think this film is incredibly slept on, despite some issues here and there. Like, I feel like the portrayal of black men is a bit negative and a bit stereotypical, like, oh, they're all gangsters and all this stuff, they're all drug dealers. I don't really like that, which obviously the new one rectifies in spades. And so I don't think that's really great element of the movie. And like I said, I wish that they had weaved the thread a bit tighter when it came to the marriage narrative. Like, if there was like one more scene between the two of them, I think really would have solidified it all that much more. But as it stands, I think Candyman is just one of the most impressive horror movies. And of course the Philip Glass score is just absolutely incredible. Very organ driven, very piano driven. You wouldn't expect it for a slasher movie, but it works so well, and still stands up to this day. And I absolutely love the editing in this movie as well, the direction from Bernard Rose, the transitions that he uses between scenes with match cuts on Virginia Madsen's eyes, or just the way he'll edit in, specific small frames in the movie that really leave a psychological impact on you. It's very, very, very well put together, very tightly edited, and I love seeing movies with a vision, especially in the slasher genre, because really I don't think there's much like Candyman. As I said, I'd put it up there with the best horror films from the 90s, and just some of the best horror movies of all time. Really, if you guys haven't seen Candyman, you have to check it out because it's an absolute classic. And I'm going to give Candyman a 9 out of 10. I can't recommend this movie enough. I'm so glad I finally saw this. Completely blew my expectations out of the water, but really glad that it did nonetheless. So yeah, guys, let me know what you think about the original Candyman down in the comments below. And let me know if you haven't seen it. Are you planning on watching it? You certainly should. It's the right time of year to do that. And of course, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel. Maybe I'll do another horror review this month. I don't know, but there is a lot coming out very, very soon. I think I should have seen Taylor Swift Eras Tour at this point in time. I do not know, but I'm thinking that might be the next review on this channel, so stay on the lookout for that. And until the next one, take it easy, guys. I'll talk to you later.